The care guides are wrong and I'm here to correct them. You know what? Actually, that sounded real heavy-handed, a little arrogant, actually. I don't think we want to come out of the gate that strong. You know what? Are we still rolling? Do we have time for another take? Welcome to the Green Room. I'm Bob Bledsoe. This is Molly Malone. And today we're going to pick apart some of the things that we commonly see in care guides that I either think are maybe wrong or just maybe not as important as a lot of people think they are. And I want to preface this entire video by saying, once again, that there are many ways to successfully keep a snake. And you don't necessarily have to do it the same way I do it, and that's okay. I just want to share my thoughts on some of these rules and let you know how I choose to do things. Let's kick things off by surprising you with one that everybody says you should do. I've even said that you should do it. And that is giving your snake an entire 7 days in their brand new enclosure before offering them food. What most care guides say that you should do is, get your new snake, put them in their enclosure, don't touch them, don't mess with them, don't do anything. Give them 7 days to get used to their enclosure. Then you offer them food. And then if they take the food, you give them a couple days to digest, and then you can handle them. I'll tell you that, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, by the way. That's a great way to go. But what I do speeds up the process a little bit, and that is I still want to give them 7 full days in their enclosure before I start interactions with them. But I usually feed on day 4 or 5. And what that does is it allows them to be digesting during some of those days that they're getting used to their enclosure. And then we start interactions on day 7. Just speeds up the process a little bit. Now, there are some snakes that are going to take a very long time to get used to their cage and they won't eat during that time. So what I do when I offer on day 4 or 5 is just a gentle offer. I'm not trying to pester them with it. I'm not trying to get them to strike or anything. I'm just warming up a rodent and offering it and maybe wiggling it around a little bit. If they don't take it, no big deal. But like I said, it speeds up the process with a new snake. And I've found that with most snakes, when introduced into a nice setup that is secure for them, they're ready to eat after a couple days. Here's little Pip, my pygmy python. And this is a rule that I hear a lot. I've seen it in care guides and I hear people talk about it all the time. And that is, don't handle your snake the day that you're going to feed them, because presumably they won't take food. And in 98% of cases, I think that's very silly. I don't have any snakes that would have a problem taking food on the day that I handled them. Pip actually eats food out of my hand. Now, there are a couple of instances that this might be a valid concern. That would be for maybe a brand new baby that just hatched or was just born and they're very scared of the big monkey, and that, it's like their first feeding or something like that. Also with, let's say, a wild caught animal, or it doesn't have to be wild caught, but just an extremely fearful animal where that handling session is going to be so traumatic that they're traumatized for the day and then they won't eat. Because that's what the implication is that your handling session is going to traumatize your snake so much that they're going to refuse food for the rest of the day. And in most cases with pet snakes, that's not true. They're going to be just fine. So give it a shot. Handle your snake and then feed them later that day. They're probably going to take it. Maybe if you have a snake that doesn't eat very well anyway, you don't want to rock the boat, maybe. But under most normal circumstances, it's going to be just fine. You might have heard me mention this next one in my most recent ball python care guide, but I think it's worth mentioning again. This is Captain Farrell, by the way. And that is people saying that you should give your ball python a water dish big enough for them to soak in. This is in almost every care guide you see because ball pythons will soak in their water dish, and people think that that's healthy for them to do. I don't do this. And the reason is that no matter how clean you keep your cages, your snake is going to pee and they're going to poop in their cages and they're going to have some of that remnants on their body. And they're going to bring in all that bacteria into their drinking water. I don't think that's the healthiest practice. So I don't let most of my snakes, I don't let them soak in their water dish. And they do just fine with that. I posted a video of Handsome Dan, who's my boa, but same situation with him. I don't want him soaking in his water dish. I posted a video on TikTok of just 30 seconds of Handsome Dan drinking out of his water dish. And like often happens on TikTok, someone wanted to school me about my care of snakes and teach me something. So they said, you should give your boa a water bowl big enough for them to drink out of. Soak in, not drink out of. And so I tried to politely explain why I don't do that. And this person said that they do it because if their snakes will take advantage of it, they want to provide something that their snakes will take advantage of. Now, I didn't make this argument because you don't have all this room to argue with people on TikTok, and I don't want to do those arguments anyway. But my point is that your snake will take advantage of all sorts of stuff. Captain Farrell here would be happy to climb 10 foot high into the air, but ball pythons will fall. So I talk about this a lot. I don't allow my snakes, I don't give them the opportunity to climb really high up so that they can fall. That's dangerous for them. They will potentially take advantage of soaking in a giant water dish. I don't want to give them that opportunity because I don't think it's healthy for them, and they do just fine without soaking. All of my snakes do just fine without soaking in their water dish. Now, there are different species that are more of water snakes that you can provide water to. My super dwarf reticulated pythons, I give big water tubs to because reticulated pythons spend a lot of time in the water. Now, I've never seen those two just sitting there soaking in their water before, but they will climb through it occasionally, and I make sure to keep their water clean all the time, especially if they're, climbing through it. This is Douglas, my scrub python, and we're doing choice-based handling today. And it is not his choice to be handled based on he's in a log. So there he is. Anyway, the next one is, what was the next one? I got distracted by Douglas. Oh, I know what it is. The next one is that, and I don't know that this is necessarily in care guides, like written in care guides, but I hear it a lot, so we're going to include it. And that is that mice are bad for your ball python, or rats are bad for corn snakes. It seems like every group of different species snake keepers has a different idea of what type of rodent is bad for their type of snake. And the fact is that the protein and fat content of rats and mice are very similar, and they're not nearly enough to cause any kind of damage to your snake, regardless of what type of snake you have, if they're eating that particular rodent. A ball python that doesn't eat rats does just fine on mice. I have a couple of them. I've shown them to you. They're not out right now because they just ate mice yesterday. And they've done just fine. A corn snake on rats their whole life is going to do just fine. It's not a problem. Now, there is a case where a mouse might be better than a rat. And that's when we're talking about very young rodents. You know what? I think I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to put Douglas back. There he is. We can't see him very well anyway. All right, be right back. Okay, here's where there is a bit of difference. This is a rat pup, frozen. This is a large mouse. They're roughly the same size. The difference here, and it's a pretty big difference, is that this rat pup has not developed much bone structure yet, and they're still on milk. They're not eating regular rat food yet. So they got a gut load of milk and they don't have bones. This large mouse has good bone structure and has been eating chow and has a gut load of chow that mice normally eat, and that's part of your snake's nutrition. So out of these two, the mouse would be more nutritious. I usually put baby ball pythons on rat pups as soon as possible, though, because I want them to get used to eating rats. And it's not bad for them necessarily. It's just not as healthy as this mouse would be. I just don't want to get ball pythons stuck on mice. Now, there are other species that will readily take whatever you want to give them. So, for instance, I just fed Bella today, and Bella could take like a pinky rat or a fuzzy rat, but instead, she's only had mice. She gets a small mouse, which has bone structure and a healthy gut load. So she'll get mice pretty much exclusively, sometimes quail, reptilinks, stuff like that, but she won't get a rat until I can feed her a weaned rat. And a weaned rat has bone structure, and they're weaned off the mom's milk, so they've got a good gut load. So that's where there's a difference, is in the young animals, but once they're a little bit older, nutritionally, it's not that big of a deal. I want to amend something I just said that I thought of as I was putting those rodents back in the freezer. I used corn snakes as an example of a snake that you can feed either rats or mice to. But I realized that with corn snakes, for most of their lives, they're going to be eating those smaller prey items. So in that case, for the reason that I just talked about, mice would be better for corn snakes. People always cite the reason, regardless of whether they think rats are healthier or mice are healthier, people always cite the reason that the other one is fattier. And so either rats are fattier or mice are fattier. I believe that technically, I think mice are a little fattier. I'll have to look at the nutritional thing. But again, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. If you're feeding small snakes, small things though, mice would be your better choice. This is Max. Humidity causes respiratory infections. Nope, that's wrong. Respiratory infections are caused by two things: bacteria and viruses. Now, if you have a dirty cage and your humidity is high, that's a great way to have the bacteria reproduce and grow and potentially infect your snake. Ball pythons require a relatively humid cage, so you got to keep your cage clean. But if your ball python gets a respiratory infection from bacteria, that's not because of the humidity, it's because of the bacteria. They can also get it virally from another snake, but most respiratory infections are from bacteria. And, you know, we don't want our snakes to have respiratory infections. Those can cause death. So, you know, keep your cages clean and your snake will do just fine. So these are just a few things that I do differently from the normal care guides that we're going to find for the most part online. But there are also some crazy care guides that have pretty wild information. I'm going to share one with you in a second that I found. And first, though, I want to acknowledge our channel sponsors, Black Box Cages, Lane Labs, the Royals Project, and Rare Genetics RGI. These businesses support the channel, and I hope you will support them if you get a chance. While I talk about this ridiculous care guide, we're going to scroll the Horde of Keepers. That's the secret society over on patreon.com/greenroompythons of wonderful snake keepers. It's a secret, but we're going to scroll each and every individual name right now. I just looked up this morning ball python care guides, and admittedly, I clicked on this one because I thought it probably was going to be bad. It's from a place that gives general advice about all kinds of animals, not just reptile specific, and they're sponsored by a big brand that is also not reptile specific. So I thought, okay, this will probably have some bad information, and boy, did it. All right, here we go. Start juvenile snakes on a diet of pinkies or young, nearly hairless mice. No, that's wrong. I start my smallest hatchling ball pythons off on hopper mice. That's not pinkies or hairless. Quite a bit bigger than pinkies or hairless. And most of my new baby ball pythons, I start off on rat pups, which is quite a bit bigger. So that's advice that pet stores give sometimes. They go, oh, feed your snake pinkies. And then you see all these little skinny snakes. No reason to do that. Here's one that's not super egregious, but it kind of is. The recommended temperature for the warm end of a ball python's habitat is 95 degrees Fahrenheit, while the cooler end should be kept around 78. I don't mind the temperature for the cooler end. 95 is way too high. I've said in my most recent care guide that 90 is generally the accepted number, but I like to keep my snakes even cooler than 90. They seem to do well at about 88. So 88 on the warm side, 78 on the cool side. That's about where I keep mine. If wood shavings, mulch, or coconut husk bedding of any kind is used, the snake should be fed in a separate enclosure without loose substrate. Otherwise, the snake may accidentally consume bedding particles that are ingestible and could cause gastrointestinal obstruction. All right, so this is something that I hear a lot. People are real concerned that their snake is going to eat some of their bedding, and should they feed in a separate container? No, don't feed in a separate container. Keep in mind that snakes in the wild eat their bedding all the time. These snakes have digestive juices that are way stronger than a human's because they're designed to digest bone, feathers, fur, everything. If they're digesting bones, they can digest a little bit of cocoa husk. Now, the reason that I keep brand new babies on paper is I don't want them on thick cocoa husk that could be like the size of one of their prey items. That could cause an obstruction. That's something that they probably couldn't digest as well because it's big. So I either put babies on very small chip or just paper. But for a snake like this, he can eat some cocoa husk. That's no problem at all. No reason to feed them in a separate container. And then here's another reason to feed them in a separate container. Ideally, feeding sessions should take place in a separate enclosure. That way the snake will learn not to associate the pet parent's hand or the opening of its usual habitat with feeding. This is something that pet stores have been recommending since like the 1970s probably, but most of the good ones stopped recommending it in the 90s because it's a myth that your snake is not going to get cage aggressive. And if they are like food aggressive like that, tap training is the way to go. Don't pull your snake out and feed it in a separate enclosure. The reason is it's unnecessary stress on the animal. After they've eaten, you're going to pick them up and put them back in their enclosure, and it could potentially cause regurgitation. So there's no reason for it, and it's actually worse for the snake than it is doing any good at all. So when I read that one, I went, oh, this person has never owned a snake before. They're just getting stuff off the internet and putting together a care guide based on that. We're going to talk about that in a second. Pet parents should monitor their snake's behavior to be sure they're not always hiding, as they won't have a chance to benefit from UV exposure. Okay, so they're saying if your ball python hides a lot during the day, which is what they do as a species, make sure you pull them out occasionally so they can get that UV. You know, we've talked about that you can provide UV for your animal if you want to, but we haven't found much benefit at this point to UV. Ball pythons definitely don't bask. And, you know, there's anecdotal stories from some people that think it's good for their snake. I've tried it on a number of species and haven't found much at all with my non-basking snakes. So, but certainly if you're using UV, don't pull your snake out of their hide so they can be exposed to it. They'll do, if they want UV, they'll do it themselves. They'll pop a coil out or something like that. So that's very silly. So this care guide was written by a veterinarian. And for a lot of people, that would give the care guide a lot of credibility. However, I've mentioned this a number of times before, veterinarians are trained to diagnose and treat disease and illness in animals. They are not, especially, think of an exotic vet that takes all kinds of birds, all kinds of reptiles, all kinds of amphibians, and all kinds of small mammals. They are not trained on the husbandry of every animal that they could potentially see in their office. They're not husbandry experts. This is like if you were asking a surgeon for parenting advice. It may not be in their wheelhouse. Now, when I read this care guide, it was clear to me that this person probably has never kept snakes, but the below the care guide, it says, Dr. name redacted, has practiced small animal and exotic medicine all over the United States and currently lives in state redacted with her 3 dogs and 1 cat. And my guess is that this vet is probably very good at the husbandry of dogs and cats because that's what they have. So just a reminder that your exotic vet could coincidentally keep the same species that you're bringing to them and therefore have some husbandry expertise, but chances are they don't. And that's okay because it's not their job. So look, there is a lot of bad info on the internet, and there's also a lot of good information, and there's a lot of okay information that you could potentially tweak based on how you want to work with your animals. Like I said, we all do it differently, and that's okay. The trick, though, is understanding the species you have and then understanding your individual animal. That's going to really help in getting you to sift through all this information. But I hope that the few points that I made in this video were helpful in doing that. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.